Welcome to Bible study. We're preparing for the Bible study we're going to host on January 23rd today. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel, chapters 13, 14, and 15, along with Psalm number 3. As we consider David's psalm that it tributes to him as he flees from his son Absalom. To really hear these chapters, we of course have to back up a little bit. Last week we had a fascinating conversation about chapters 11 and 12 as we considered David's adulterous, murderous affair with his soon-to-be wife Bathsheba. And we noted so many interesting things about it, about how that story gets used by people today, but also how the Bible was using this story, particularly to comfort and to address the questions and the concerns of his exilic people. As they were wondering, why are we here? What has happened that we ended up in exile? And I think the Deuteronomic history is being pretty straightforward with him and saying that here was a problem that is sitting right at the very root and the heart of who we are. Even when we were at the top of our game, even when things were at their very best, when David was king and the empire was expanding and the money was coming in and everything felt good, David was breaking up somebody else's home, having an adulterous affair, murdering the husband to cover up his sin. And there were problems. Today we are going to see consequence of what David has done, really taking root and taking shape and threatening his very kingdom and threatening his very life. It starts off with a terrible tragedy, a story told of the children of the king himself. David, having destroyed the home of Uriah the Hittite and Bathsheba, finds now that his own home is likewise wrought with tensions and with strife and ultimately murder and death. One of David's sons falls infatuately in love with one of his stepsisters, Tamar. He ends up contriving an excuse to be alone with her, and he ends up raping her. And then it says his ardor for her is immediately cooled, and he boots her out of the house, and she walks home in shame, and it is a terrible thing. Her full brother, a young man by the name of Absalom, pledges to wreak vengeance. And finally, as the chapter unfolds in the second half of chapter 13, that is exactly what he does. 2 full years later, Absalom had sheep shears in Baal Hazor, and he invited all of the king's sons to come and celebrate with him at the sheep shearing. And while they're all there, Absalom kills Ammon. Strike Ammon, he says, and do not be afraid. Have I not myself commanded you? And so the servants of Absalom did to Ammon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted on his mule. They all fled. They all ran away. And David is left with his terrible, terrible situation. He's lost one of his sons. And now, really, justice demands that he loses another. And David is torn by this. Finally, he banishes Absalom, and Absalom flees, and he goes to Talmai, the son of Ahimmihud, the king of Geshur, a small nation that is allied with David, but he is exiled from the capital city. But David's heart is broken by this. And Joab, here comes Joab again, always the conniver and always the real politician in this. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceives that the king's mind was on Absalom. And he contrives this complicated scenario with a woman who comes in and who sort of does a parable, much along the lines of what Nathan did with David and Bathsheba. And he finally convinces David to bring Absalom back home. Initially, he's not supposed to come into the presence of David, but then that gets relaxed, and David is reconciled to his son. But apparently his son is not reconciled to him. For Absalom plots almost from the beginning that he will remove his father from the throne. He starts a concerted campaign to win over the hearts and the minds of the Israelite people. David apparently had not set up an adequate system of adjudicating cases, of a legal system, a court system for the nation of Israel, as complicated as it was growing to be. And Absalom steps into that void, and he starts effectively setting up a parallel system of government. And finally, in chapter 15, we get that Absalom gets himself a chariot with horses and 50 men to run ahead of him. He rises early, and he really is setting himself up as an authority, as somebody of power. After 4 years, this has gone on for quite a while. David, blind to this, is David, it doesn't really say, but David can't figure it out. David suddenly realizes the threat that Absalom poses. And so Absalom goes to Hebron. David says, sure, go to Hebron, but remember, Hebron is the place where you make a king. That's where David had been crowned. Hebron is the place where Abraham is buried. Hebron is a foundational place for the nation of Israel. So he got up, he went to Hebron, but Absalom had sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then shout, Absalom has become king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They were invited guests. They went in their innocence. They had no idea what was going on. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilo. And the conspiracy started to grow in strength, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. This looks like it's a real insurrection. It's a real coup. A messenger came to David saying, the hearts of Israel have gone after Absalom. Get up, says David. Get up, let us flee, or there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Hurry, or he will soon overtake us and bring disaster down upon us and attack the city with the edge of the sword. The king's officials said, your servants are ready to do what you want. So the king left, followed by all of his household, except for 10 concubines whom he left in charge of the palace. The king left, followed by all of the people. They stopped at the last house. All of his officials passed by him, and all the Kerethites and all the Pelethites. We don't know exactly who these guys are, by the way, but they appear to be like a bodyguard. And some people have even speculated that they may have been Philistines. That they may have been people that had been loyal to David from all the way back at the time when he was himself fighting against Saul. And so it makes some sense that if these were his close bodyguards, that they would be the ones who would go with him. The 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. These are guys from Gath. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you coming too? And he says, I have nowhere else to go. So David says, come. But a couple of people he sends back, and this is very interesting, because David is actually still a pretty crafty, cagey old politician. And the Deuteronomist really wants you to see that David is not just rolling over and playing dead here. He is still taking an active part in the preservation of his throne and of his life. So Abiathar comes, and Zadok, the 2 priests. And David goes, we're going to put you guys out of this, sort of. You guys go back, but bring your sons with you. And if you need to get a message to me, send your sons and meet us here. So what he does is he sets up a communication network, a spy network. And then David encounters Hushai, one of his old counselors. Hushai the Archite. And David says to Hushai, he says, if you come along, this is going to be rough. We're going to be marching hard. We're going to be walking late into the night. He says, you will be a burden to me. But why don't you go back and pretend to be Absalom's counselor? And you can thwart the advice given by Ahithophel, the Gileonite, that we just heard about a little bit ago. And so now you see David putting in place the means for Absalom's defeat. He's now got a line of communication coming, and he's got people in place that are loyal to him, but who are going to be working against Absalom. So David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, his head covered, and he was walking barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went. David was told that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom. And David prayed, O Lord, I pray you turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. If you keep reading a little bit, and we're going to pick this up next week because this will be taken up in a second psalm. But David, on his way out, has a number of people curse him. He has a number of old scores kind of try to get settled here, as some of the people who had been loyal to Saul now start coming out of the woodwork. Some of the people who were family of Saul, Mephibosheth is going to think that he is going to get the kingdom back briefly. But we're going to see David really at a low point in his life and career, who had once been the great king, now is skulking out of town, surrounded by the vulnerable around him and a little bit of his bodyguard. And it looks like David might, in fact, be overthrown. God will keep his promise. The son of David will sit on the throne, but this was not at all how David wanted to pass on his reign to a son. David's sins have come home to roost, haven't they? He has destroyed a family. He has destroyed a home. And now his own home and his own family are being racked apart, broken. There is a certain justice to this, says the Deuteronomist. And is there in fact justice to what is happening to the Israelites as well? Does one of the messages to come out of this is that when we suffer, as the people in exile did, do we need to say, I don't suffer unjustly? That the nation of Israel in its suffering is perhaps given to remember the way that it has treated others. And we have seen that show up in several other places already. The Deuteronomist has noted that David at times has slaughtered people by the thousands. And is the Deuteronomist saying, as these people rise up against us, as these people have worked against our well-being, is that in fact our own sins coming back around to us, that there is a symmetry involved here? That's part of the story. It's certainly not all of it. And for the rest of the story, you really have to come to this psalm that is attached to this event. As David flees his son Absalom, it says he writes Psalm number 3. The third psalm. Now, we need to stop right there and just talk a little bit. It appears that the Psalter, as it was compiled, may have had two psalms put in kind of an introduction, Psalm number 1 and number 2, that these were not actually numbered in the same way. This would be kind of prefatory psalms, that this is actually the first psalm of the first book, that Psalms 1 and 2 may have been may have been actually appended to the entire collection. We say that because the numbering is off, because all the other numbers are equal, but the first book has 2 extras. And so it may well be that they thought of this as the first psalm. I don't know what that means. A psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. O Lord, he writes, how many are my foes? Many are rising up against me. Many are saying to me, there is no help for you in God. David has lots of people working against him. Absalom, his own son, but Ahithophel and the many others who have gathered. All Israel, it says, has gone over to Absalom. And many are saying about me that God's not going to help him this time. But David will not give up on God. O Lord, you are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy hill. David will not abandon the Lord. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, for the Lord sustains me. We're going to notice as the story unfolds, and the reader would have surely known this, that there is a night that passes here. And that night is critical to the unfolding of the events, that Absalom delays for a night. I sleep, I wake up, the Lord sustains me. It is during that night that the tide really turns for David. I am not afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Rise up, O Lord. Deliver me, O my God, for you shall strike all my enemies on the cheek, and you shall break the teeth of the wicked. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. May your blessing be on your people. Even when David is justly receiving, if you will, the consequences of his own sins, he still relies on God. He still turns to him and says, my only hope and my only help is from the Lord. Even though I too receive this from the hand of God, even though this is something that has happened to me, and these thousands rise up against me, I still will trust in God. On the deepest and the darkest and the most difficult of days. And even when I have brought those on myself, it is God and God alone who will be my hope and my salvation. What makes David a great king is not that he got everything right or that his life was rosy and good. It's that he trusted in God. And that is the exhortation that was given to those exiled people of long ago. And it is the exhortation which continues to be made to us on difficult and trying days. Trust in God. He's your really only hope. He is the resurrection and the life. He has us in his hand, and no one can snatch us from it. We belong to him. We hope to see you on Sunday. God bless you all. Take care.